Good morning and good day. Welcome to 3:15 o'clock, that very channel where the unspoken becomes unforgettable. Do you have the courage to explore the stories they always wanted to hide from you? This is not just a horror channel. This is a place where silence is shattered by secrets, and every story carries a weight of fear it was never meant to bear. The first story, the last gasp burger. My burger was looking at me, and its tiny pickled eyes slowly winked. It didn't blink. It didn't twitch. It winked with that slow, almost indecent intimacy of large beetles or of people who know some shameful secret about you. The smell of old grease, vinegar, and something else, something sweetish and putrid that I hadn't noticed before, hung in the air. My ears were ringing with the deafening hum of silence, broken only by the steady ticking of the wall clock behind the counter and the heavy, irregular thud of my own heart. It all started after I'd driven halfway across Texas. The wheels droned steadily on the scorching asphalt, and out the window sun-scorched plains flashed by, occasionally interrupted by sickly groves of trees. Hunger was twisting my insides into a tight, painful knot. I turned off the highway onto a country road, guided by a dust-filmed sign, Joe's Diner, the best miles in Texas. The best miles might have been, but the establishment itself looked like it hadn't been renovated since before I was born. A single-story building of brick that had once been red, a sagging roof, a rusty pickup truck parked on the shoulder, classic American nowhere. Inside smelled the same as outside, dust and heat, but with a thick undercurrent of old fryer oil and cold coffee. The air was viscous, motionless. Behind the counter sat who I assumed was Joe himself, a man with a face carved with wrinkles like a dry riverbed. He was lazily wiping something with a rag and merely nodded toward a free table. The menu was sticky to the touch. I skimmed the list and chose what was highlighted in bold, the Last Gasp Burger, chef's specialty. It sounded promising for a starving trucker. "Your chef a funny guy?" I asked hoarsely, handing the menu back. Joe smirked with the corner of his mouth, and his eyes went blank, glassy for a moment. "The chef's an artist, in his own way, never throws anything away, respects the product." I didn't wait long for the food. A few minutes later, Joe brought out a plate. The burger looked normal, a juicy, dark patty, melted cheese, a leaf of lettuce, a pickled cucumber, a bun slightly grilled. But even then I noticed something strange. A faint steam rose from the patty, as if it were icy inside, not hot. I put it down to the air conditioning, which, by the way, was clearly not working. I sank my teeth into the soft bun. The meat was indeed juicy, but not warm, cold and surprisingly elastic. It didn't chew so much as it sprang back under my teeth, resisting. And at that moment, as I was about to take a second bite, I felt it, a stirring, a faint, barely perceptible but absolutely distinct movement in my mouth. Something alive was wriggling on my tongue. Reflex acted faster than thought. I forcefully spat the unchewed mass right onto the table. Saliva, pieces of bread, and that particular piece of meat spread across the sticky surface. And it moved. This was no trick of the light or a sick imagination. The piece of patty, about the size of half a walnut, was squirming. It contracted, straightened, and a crack appeared on its velvety red surface. From it, slowly as if being born, crawled a fat, shiny white larva. It writhed on the table, blind and disgusting. A lump rose in my throat. My stomach, which a second ago had been demanding food, now convulsed, trying to expel what had already made its way inside. I shoved the burger away in disgust. It fell patty side up on the dirty floor, and the bun rolled away. I sat there breathing heavily, staring at the abomination on the table. The larva went still. The ticking of the clock grew louder, and then I looked at the floor. The patty lay motionless, and suddenly its edge, the one closest to me, slowly lifted. It wasn't a shift, not a deformation. It was a precise, conscious gesture. The edge of the patty curled upward like the eyelid of a giant creature, and from under it peered, and a small, wet, dark eye on a short, muscular stalk. It was the size of a pea, but in its depths swirled some sticky, ancient horror. It was alive, aware, and utterly alien. It stared at me, not just looked, but absorbed me, studied me with a silent, inexpressible reproach. And then, with a nasty, almost human slowness, it winked. Time stopped. My brain refused to believe it. A hallucination, food poisoning, fatigue, anything. Behind me, the kitchen door creaked. I turned around, moving as if in a dream. The chef stood in the doorway, tall, gaunt, in a grease-stained apron. His face was pale and immobile, and his eyes, too small and set too close together. They gleamed like a rat's. "Didn't you like it?" His voice was raspy like an unoiled door. He wasn't looking at me, but at the burger on the floor. At that very eye, I couldn't make a sound. I pointed a trembling finger at the floor. The chef slowly, unhurriedly, walked over and bent down. He expressed neither surprise nor disgust. He examined the creation of his hands carefully, and then his gaze slid to me. In his small eyes was not regret, but annoyance, like a sculptor whose work has been destroyed by a barbarian. "A pity," he said. "It wasn't ready yet. It needed to reach the consumer, to become part of something greater. You interrupted the process." He straightened up and walked back to the kitchen. His steps were measured, precise. The door didn't close behind him. From the crack came sounds. Not the usual kitchen sounds, the sizzle of oil, the clatter of a knife. From there came a wet, squelching, pulsating gurgle. And the smell, that same Swedish putrid smell I'd noticed earlier, now became thick, almost tangible. The smell of old meat, earth, and decay. I sat paralyzed with horror. My gaze locked onto the floor again. The eye was still watching me, but now, in its depths, I read not just obstinacy, but hunger, an insatiable primal hunger. I heard footsteps. The chef emerged from the kitchen. In one hand, he held a large butcher's knife, its blade slick with something dark and viscous, slowly sliding toward the handle. In the other, he was leading Joe, or rather, what was left of him. Joe shuffled along, his eyes just as empty, but now a blissful, idiotic grin was frozen on his face. From his half-open mouth dangled and squirmed the same white larva. He wasn't dead, he was an incubator. "No sense wasting good product," the chef rasped. His small eyes glinted. "You're hungry, aren't you? You did order the last gasp. That's not a name. It's an instruction." He took a step forward. Joe, leering, shuffled after him. Adrenaline finally exploded in my veins. I overturned the table with a crash and lunged for the exit. My hand was already on the handle when I heard behind me not a voice, but something else. A wet, gurgling whisper coming from everywhere at once, from the kitchen, from Joe, even from the floor, from that very burger. "Stay. Become part. Become food for the one who comes after." I burst outside into the blinding Texas sun. The door slammed shut behind me, but not with a normal sound. It was as if a giant valve of flesh had clapped shut. I sped down the deserted road, flooring the gas pedal, not looking back. But I knew it with a chilling certainty. The horror hadn't stayed back there in that diner. It was with me. In my mouth, on my tongue, I could still feel that same elastic, cold texture. And somewhere deep in my throat, at the very bottom of my esophagus, something shifted weakly, barely perceptibly. The last gasp. It's not something they give to you. It's something you give to them, and the process has already begun. It's happening inside me right now, and I'm carrying it with me along endless roads, spreading the contagion, waiting for it to grow, for it to awaken and gaze out through my own eyes. And it will be hungry. The second story, the infinite cup. I've been drinking this coffee for 3 hours, but the cup won't empty. 3 hours, 180 minutes, 10,800 seconds. I know this because I've been watching the clock with the ceramic face on the wall opposite me. Its hand moves with a lazy, almost mocking slowness, but the level of the dark liquid in my white porcelain cup does not drop. At all. I take a sip. Bitter, scalding, with a metallic aftertaste, and it refills immediately. Not from a pitcher, not from an invisible source. It just becomes full again, as if I had never touched it at all. It all started with fatigue. The kind of fatigue where your bones ache and your eyelids feel like lead. I was driving from Seattle to Washington, D.C. The delegation ran long, things went sideways, and I decided to set out at night to avoid traffic. A mistake. By 3 in the morning, the world outside my car window had shrunk to a strip of asphalt in the headlights, beyond which swirled an impenetrable darkness. My eyes were glued shut, my head nodding heavily toward the steering wheel. I needed a break, caffeine, some kind of stopping point, and then I saw it. A neon sign flickering in the pitch black on the outskirts of some suburban neighborhood that seemed deserted. The Eternal Sit-In, a strange name for a cafe. Beneath the sign, a window glowed with a soft golden light, hinting at a cozy interior, a beacon in the night. I turned into the nearly empty parking lot, killed the engine, and stumbled inside, swaying with exhaustion. The air inside was thick and sweet, smelling of freshly ground coffee, vanilla, and something else, faintly familiar yet indefinable. Like the scent of an old book that hasn't been opened in years. It was quiet. A soft, melancholic saxophone melody was playing, but I couldn't pinpoint its source. The cafe consisted of several arched halls leading deeper inside, each with 3 or 4 tables. The decor was cute, even a little old-fashioned. Couches with velvet upholstery, low dark wood tables, paintings on the walls depicting this very same cafe, but from different angles. A cozy trap. No one was at the counter. I sat down near the entrance, dropped my coat on the seat beside me, and was about to call for someone when he appeared. The waiter, tall, slender, in a perfectly pressed white shirt and a black vest. His skin was unnaturally pale, almost porcelain, and the waves of his dark hair lay too perfectly. But most striking was his smile, wide, unchanging, frozen. It didn't reach his eyes, which were the color of old coffee and seemed utterly empty. "Good evening." His voice was velvety, soothing. "What will it be?" "Just coffee, please, black, a large cup." "1 cup of black coffee," he repeated, and his smile seemed to widen. "A wise choice." He disappeared into the depths of the establishment and returned a moment later, carrying on a small tray a single porcelain cup. It was full to the brim with a dark, almost black liquid from which a faint steam rose. He set it down in front of me without a saucer, without a spoon, without sugar. "Enjoy," he said, and melted into the shadows of the next hall. The first sip was a relief. Hot, strong. It spread through my body, banishing the numbness. I closed my eyes, savoring the moment. The fatigue began to recede. I took another sip, then another. And that's when I noticed the strangeness. The cup remained full. I frowned, put it down on the table, looked inside. Full. I took another, this time a greedy gulp, watching the level. The coffee touched my lips. I tasted it, swallowed. But in the cup, it was as if it hadn't diminished. It just was. Full. Hallucinations from exhaustion, I thought, and drank more. And more. 15 minutes passed. Half an hour. An hour. The cup was full, and I started to feel strange. The initial surge of alertness was replaced by a heavy, damp apathy. Strength wasn't returning, it was leaving. It was as if all the energy, all the will, had been sucked out of me. Thoughts of the road, of the meeting, of needing to drive further began to blur, to fog up, as if they weren't my memories but scenes from an old, forgotten movie. "Who am I, Sarah? Sarah Evans. I'm driving from Seattle. Or to Seattle." My forehead broke out in a sweat. Fear, cold and clammy, slithered down my spine. I need to leave. Right now. I tried to stand up, and I couldn't. My legs wouldn't obey. They were heavy, leaden, as if they had grown roots into the floor. I made an effort, pushed my hands against the table, trying to lift myself. My muscles tensed to the point of trembling, but I didn't move an inch. It was like that nightmare where you try to run from danger but your legs refuse to move. Panic, sharp and blind, tightened my throat. I looked around the room, seeking help, and only now did I truly look around. In the hall where I was sitting, there were 3 other tables. At one, in the corner, sat an elderly man in a worn-out cap. He slowly, mechanically brought his cup to his lips, took a silent sip, and lowered it. His eyes were glazed over, empty, staring at nothing. And on his face was frozen that same blissful, expressionless smile the waiter had. He didn't blink, didn't move, only drank rhythmically. At another table, a young girl. She clutched her cup with both hands, like a child hugging a favorite toy, and pressed her cheek against it, smiling in her sleep. Her eyes were closed, but that same serene, idiotic smile didn't leave her lips. She wasn't drinking. She was just sitting there, happy and empty. The 3rd table was behind me. I turned my head with difficulty. A man in a business suit was sitting there. He was crying. Quiet, soundless tears rolled down his cheeks, but his face was also distorted by that same absurd, motionless smile. He was drinking between sobs that made no sound, and his cup was also full. Ice-cold horror seized me. I'm not alone. We are all here, trapped. Help, I exhaled, and my voice sounded hoarse and weak, as if swallowed by the soft couch upholstery. Please help me. No one reacted. Not a single muscle twitched on the faces of my fellow sufferers. They just kept drinking, smiling, existing. I tried to jerk away again, to push off from the table. My hand trembled and knocked the cup over. My heart leaped with hope. This is it, the end. The coffee spilled onto the polished table surface, a dark puddle spreading, dripping onto the floor, and disappeared without a trace. And on the table in front of me stood the same white porcelain cup, full to the brim with dark coffee. I screamed. A short, stifled scream that was drowned out by the same cursed music. I had to get out. I leaned forward with all my might, grabbed the back of the couch, and using my arms, dragged my motionless body. It was unbearably heavy, as if I were dragging another person. Centimeter by centimeter, I slid off the seat and collapsed onto the floor. The carpet cushioned my fall softly. My legs still refused to work. They dragged behind me like sacks of sand. I crawled toward the exit, toward the door I came in through. It was only 10 meters away. A whole world. I crawled, digging my fingers into the carpet pile, feeling every bone ache from the unbearable strain. I didn't look around, only forward, at the door, behind which was freedom, my car, the normal world. I reached it. With the last of my strength, my hand trembling, I grabbed the handle and pulled. The door opened, but behind it was not the night street, not the parking lot with my car. Behind it was another hall, absolutely identical to the one I had just crawled out of. The same soft light, the same couches, the same tables. At one of them sat the same smiling old man, drinking from his eternal cup. And next to him, my bag and coat, neatly placed on the seat as if I had always sat there. Slowly, with difficulty, I looked back. The hall I'd crawled from was still there. I had crawled 10 meters and returned to my own table. Now this was another exactly the same hall. The door didn't lead outside, but to the next link in this endless chain. Panic turned into pure, unadulterated terror. I let go of the handle and crawled away from the door, pressing my back against the wall. My breath caught. This is impossible. This can't be happening. From the shadow of the next arched passageway, the waiter emerged. His smile was unchanged. "You spilled something," he said in his velvety voice. "Don't worry. Everything will be replenished." He walked over, picked up my cup from the floor, which I must have dropped while crawling. It was full. He placed it on the nearest table. "Please continue. Enjoy the moment. Everything here is for your comfort." "Let me out," I whispered, my voice betraying me with its tremor. "What is this place?" "This is a place of peace," he answered, and his empty eyes seemed bottomless. "A place where you can forget about the hustle, about the road, about time, about yourself. Just drink, and everything will be fine." He turned and left. I remained sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, and stared at that door leading to the identical hall. I was trapped in a cafe labyrinth with no exit, where time had lost all meaning and the coffee drank you, sucking out memories, strength, personality. I don't know how long it's been. Is the clock on the wall showing the same time, or is it just my imagination? I don't try to stand up anymore. I have no strength. I sit here on the floor and look at that full cup sitting on the table 2 steps away from me. And I feel thirst. Not just thirst for water. It's a deep, aching thirst for that peace, that emptiness I see on the others' faces. A thirst to forget this horror, this hopelessness. My mind, my memories continue to slowly dissolve. I can barely remember the color of my car, my mother's face, my own name. It's easier to give up, easier to take the cup, take another sip, and then the horror will leave, giving way to a blissful, empty smile. I've been drinking this coffee for 3 hours, but the cup won't empty, and soon I will stop emptying too. I will be filled with this peace. This cup is eternal, and my sit-in is too. The third story. The special sauce. The sauce for my nuggets was warm, salty, and tasted like fear. That's not a metaphor. I know what fear tastes like. It's sharp, metallic, with a bitter aftertaste of adrenaline, and it lingers on the tongue like the taste of a coin. That was exactly the taste of that thick reddish sauce I was dipping my chicken nuggets into. I sat in my booster seat and watched a drop of the strange substance slowly slide down a French fry. Sunny Meadow. A cafe with such a cozy pastoral name should have smelled of apple pie and freshly cut grass. Instead, it smelled of old frying oil, bleach, and something else, sweet and heavy, that hung in the air like a ghost. We were stuck here because of Dad. He'd taken a wrong turn, again, and we'd been circling back roads for 2 hours as dusk gathered outside the car windows. Mom, Gloria, was like a taut wire. Her fingers drummed on the table. I told you we should have taken the highway, Matthew. Now we're lost in some godforsaken hole. Dad, Matthew, clenched his map so hard his knuckles turned white. He hated being corrected. It's a shortcut, Glory. The GPS died and the map is old. We'll find the way soon, before dark. Her voice became shrill, with 2 kids in the car. My little brother, Parker, sat across from me and wasn't part of the argument. He was completely absorbed in his food. He was 5 and his universal problems were solved by chicken nuggets and fries. The waitress, a woman with a tired face and extinguished eyes, brought him a portion with a small bowl of sauce. Our signature, she said indifferently. Parker enthusiastically began dipping pieces of chicken into the thick red mass and stuffing them into his mouth. Are they good? Mom asked, momentarily distracted from her irritation. Parker thought about it, chewing. They're good, but weird, he replied, already reaching for the next one. I watched him. He was eating with an unusual greed, as if he were truly hungry. I hadn't touched my food. The sauce repelled me. It was too red. Not like ketchup, but like something alive. And that smell, sweetish, familiar, as if I'd smelled it before a long time ago, in a situation my brain refused to remember. The parents' argument continued. Voices grew louder, words sharper. I buried myself in my glass of Coke, trying not to look at them, not to listen. I hated it when they fought. It was always like an approaching storm. And then, through the hum of their voices, I heard something else. A quiet, trembling whisper. It came from Parker. He was sitting, staring at his plate, his eyes wide open, but his gaze was empty and absent. He wasn't chewing. He just sat and whispered, "Please don't go. Stay with me, please." Mom fell silent mid-sentence. She turned to him. "Parker, sweetie, what did you say?" Parker looked up at her. His eyes were glassy. "It wasn't me," he simply said, and he spoke again. But this time the voice was different. Rougher, older, full of panicked despair. It was the voice of a strange man. "I have money. In the car, in the glove compartment. Take it all, just let me go. Let me go, please." The silence at our table became loud and ringing. Dad froze with his coffee mug halfway to his mouth. Mom slowly put down the napkin she'd been fidgeting with. "Parker," Dad said sternly, "stop fooling around. It's not funny." Parker looked at him, and a flicker of confusion passed over his face. "I'm not fooling around." And again the voice changed. This time it was a thin, shrill, piercing female voice, distorted by unspeakable pain. Oh God, it hurts. Please help. Someone. Mommy." Goosebumps ran down my spine. Mom jumped up, ran to Parker, and grabbed him by the shoulders. "Parker, stop it right now. What's wrong with you? What are these voices?" Parker began to cry, but tears streamed down his cheeks while that alien, terrifying voice continued to pour from his mouth, now interrupted by sobs. "I don't want to die. I haven't had time yet. He's coming. He's coming again." It was unbearable. It was like possession. His mouth, his throat were just instruments through which someone else was speaking. Someone dead. Dad turned pale as a sheet. He looked around. The cafe was almost empty. Besides us, only one elderly couple sat at a far table paying us no attention, and the waitress was sorting something behind the counter. "Chef," Dad shouted, his voice cracking into a falsetto. "Chef, get out here now." The kitchen doors swung open, and a man emerged. Tall, burly, in a stained white apron. His face was red and sweaty, but utterly impassive. In his hands he held a long, narrow knife, which he was slowly wiping with a rag. "What's the matter?" His voice was dull and low, like a knock on a log. "What did you put in this sauce?" Dad hissed, pointing at the bowl with the remaining red sauce. "What is this?" "My son." He's speaking in strange voices. The chef slowly turned his gaze to Parker. The boy was still crying, and from his mouth, between sobs, poured a stream of disjointed, horrifying phrases in different voices, fragments of prayers, cries for help, last words. The chef looked at this not with surprise, not with fright, but with professional interest, like a gardener watching a sprout. "So quickly," he said quietly. "It usually takes longer. He must be very sensitive." "What do you mean?" Mom screamed, clutching Parker, who was thrashing in hysterics. "What did you give him?" The chef sighed like a tired teacher who has to explain the same thing over and over again. He stepped closer, still not looking up from his knife, which he was methodically wiping. "Sauce empathy," he said in a quiet, almost gentle voice. "Our signature recipe." He looked at us with his small, deep-set eyes. There was no malice, no madness in them. Only a weary, almost sacred conviction. "We make it from what remains on the asphalt after accidents," he continued, and his whisper was louder than any scream. "Blood, sweat, particles of flesh, collected with special care, so that the memory of the dead does not go to waste, so that their last moments, their last thoughts, their fear, so that all of it doesn't just disappear. We give them a voice. We let them be heard. Your boy, he just became a conduit. He tasted their essence. Now they speak through him." Time stopped. The sounds of the cafe, the clinking of dishes, the hum of the refrigerator disappeared, swallowed by the deafening roar in my ears. I looked at the warm, reddish substance in the bowl, and my stomach clenched into a tight, painful knot. The salty taste of fear filled my mouth again. Now I understood why it was so familiar. I remembered scraping my knee as a child and a drop of blood getting on my tongue. That was its taste, only multiplied by 1,000. The taste of someone else's deathly agony. Mom made a strange, choked sound like a howl. She recoiled from Parker as if burned. Dad stood motionless, his face gray, a mask of horror frozen on it forever. You're insane," he exhaled. "That's impossible." "It's possible," the chef countered calmly. "It's chemistry, energy, emotions absorbed by flesh and asphalt. They don't disappear. They just need to be properly extracted and prepared. Some connoisseurs come here specifically for this. To touch something real, the edge of life." Parker suddenly fell silent. His body went limp. He sat staring ahead. A thin trickle of saliva mixed with remnants of sauce dripping from his chin. He was empty. There was no thought, no awareness in his eyes. only a deep, bottomless abyss, and then a new voice erupted from his chest. A child's, high, clear, piercing to the bone. "Mommy," the voice whispered. "Mommy, I'm scared. Why is it so dark? Where are you?" It was the voice of a little girl. Mom screamed. It was an inhuman scream, full of such despair and horror that even the impassive chef frowned for a moment. Dad, driven by blind instinct, lunged forward, grabbed a heavy glass salt shaker from the table, and swung it at the chef's head. The man collapsed to the floor with a dull thud, and the knife slipped from his relaxed hand. "Run," Dad roared, grabbing the catatonic Parker into his arms. "Run now!" We burst out of the cafe like scolded cats and raced to our car. I ran, not feeling my legs under me, and that little child's voice calling for its mother rang in my head. Unceasing, we piled into the car, Dad, without looking, shoved the key into the ignition, and we sped off, raising clouds of dust. I looked out the back window. No one ran out of the cafe. It stood quiet, silent, with its cozy, deceptive Sunny Meadow sign sinking into the night. We were silent the whole way. Only Dad's heavy, ragged breathing and Parker's quiet, monotonous whisper could be heard. He was speaking again. Now it was the voice of a man counting something. 53, 54. Oh God, I'm bleeding out. 55. We didn't go to the police. What could we say? That our son ate sauce made from the remains of traffic accident victims and was now possessed by their last words. We'd be laughed at, or sent to a mental hospital. We brought Parker home. He didn't recognize us. He just sat and talked for hours, days, in different voices, male, female, children's. He talked about their unfinished business, unspoken love, fear, pain. Our house filled with a chorus of the dead. We took him to doctors. Did MRIs, EEGs, tests. The doctors shrugged. Physically, he was perfectly healthy. They suggested a rare form of psychosis, schizophrenia. Prescribed pills. The pills didn't help. They only slightly muffled the voices, making them quieter, but that made them even creepier. A whisper from the depths of the soul he had lost. I couldn't take it anymore. I locked myself in my room, turned the music up full blast, but through the thumping bass I still heard them. Those voices, those last gasps. One night I went to his bed. He was lying with his eyes open, staring at the ceiling. His lips moved soundlessly. "Parker?" I called softly. "Bro, are you in there?" He slowly turned his head to me. A glimmer of awareness flashed in his eyes. "Ah, Parker, the real one. They won't leave," he whispered in his own familiar little voice. "There are so many of them. They need so much to be heard." And again his gaze clouded over, and a new, unfamiliar voice poured from his throat, mumbling something about a light at the end of the tunnel. Mom couldn't take it. She stopped leaving her room. Dad sat in the garage all day and drank. And I became obsessed. I started recording his words. First on my phone's recorder, then I got a thick notebook. I wrote down the names he mentioned, places, dates, fragments of phrases. Then I went online, searched for news about accidents in the area where the cafe was, and I found them. Again and again, a young woman died, succumbed to blood loss at the scene. Truck driver lost control, died on impact. Last words, a 7-year-old girl died on the way to the hospital. It all matched. Every detail, every cry for help, every declaration of love, every mommy. He had become an archive, a living, breathing memorial to someone else's pain. And the sauce, that damn sauce, was just the key. A door he had opened, and now it was impossible to close. Sometimes, especially at night, I feel that taste. Salty, metallic, the taste of fear. It's in my mouth, even though I haven't eaten anything. I think it's memory, or maybe it's a premonition, because yesterday, Parker, in the voice of that very chef Dad had hit with the salt shaker, said quietly and clearly, looking right at me, "Soon it will be time to harvest a new crop. The ingredients are running out. They're waiting not just for me. They're waiting for you too. And now I'm afraid to fall asleep. I'm afraid I'll wake up and feel that warm, salty taste on my tongue that reminds me of fear. and I'll understand that the door to my soul is already open too. The fourth story. The mute waiter. The waiter at the Last Stop Cafe handed me a note, and I would have given anything not to unfold it. This wasn't my first stop here. Last Stop. The name was either a tribute to black humor or a bad omen. But for truckers like me, exhausted from hours of racing down the night highway, this place was the only beacon for 100 miles around. It stood on the outskirts, at a fork in the road that civilization had forgotten to turn onto. Gas, bad coffee, a questionable burger, and a restroom where you wouldn't hesitate to take your shoes off to avoid slipping. That's all we needed. That evening, the parking lot in front of the cafe was empty. Not a single truck, not a single car. Just my multi-ton red Volvo, dusty and tired, and a couple of broken lamps casting yellow, dying circles of light onto the asphalt. I killed the engine, and the ensuing silence deafened me. Not the kind of silence you get in the city. A resonant one, filled with the echoes of life. This was a grave, absolute silence, as if the world beyond this island of light had ceased to exist. The cafe door gave way inward with an unpleasant jingle of a bell. The air was stale and smelled of old oil, fried onions and something else. Sweetish and musty, like in an abandoned basement. No one was behind the counter. The interior was plunged into semi-darkness. Only the neon light above the bar and a TV under the ceiling were glowing, showing silent frames of some old comedy. The actors' faces stretched into unnatural smiles but made no sound, and then I saw him. The waiter. He was standing in the shadows by the far table, completely motionless, blending into the darkness, and seemed to have been watching me the whole time. Tall, lean, in a white, painfully clean shirt and a black apron. His face was pale, elongated, and his eyes stared too intently and were too dark. He slowly, almost mechanically, stepped into the light and nodded, indicating one of the tables by the window. "Thanks, buddy," I muttered, plopping down onto a creaky vinyl chair. "Tough haul. Strong coffee and a cheeseburger, well done. And make it quick, I won't be long." The waiter didn't answer. He just tilted his head to the side, as if listening to the echo of my words hanging in the dead air. "Hey, you hear me?" I asked, feeling my fatigue begin to give way to mild irritation. Then he came closer, and in the dim neon light I saw and felt a cold trickle of sweat run down my back. His lips were sewn shut, neatly with a thin black thread, stitch by stitch like from a medical textbook. The stitches were old, healed, but that only made the sight more horrifying. He wasn't a freak. The scars didn't disfigure him. They functionally, finally, and irrevocably sealed his mouth. Forever. I recoiled, elbowing a glass of toothpicks. It clinked, and the sound seemed deafeningly loud. The waiter just shook his head, and in his eyes I read no threat. No plea, only emptiness, a deep, bottomless void. He moved to the counter, his movement smooth, almost silent, and returned with a menu. A small clean piece of paper and a ballpoint pen. He placed it all in front of me and took a step back, folding his hands on his apron, waiting. My heart was pounding somewhere in my throat. My mind screamed to run immediately that something was wrong here, that all of this was wrong. But my body, exhausted from the road, refused to obey. Hunger and fatigue took over. Maybe it was some terrible accident, a burn, anything. It wasn't for me to judge. With a trembling hand, I wrote down my order. He nodded, took the note, and disappeared into the kitchen. I was alone. The silence was broken only by the faint hiss of the grill from behind the door and the silent laughter from the TV screen. I tried to distract myself by looking into the dark window, which reflected only myself and the gloomy interior of the cafe. Outside was only darkness, thick, impenetrable, alive. About 20 minutes passed. The waiter brought the order. The coffee was bitter and scalding hot, the burger dry and tasteless. I ate, feeling his heavy, motionless gaze on me. He stood in the corner and watched, always watched. I tried not to make eye contact, burying my head in the plate, and hurriedly chewed the food, washing it down with the disgusting coffee. My only thought was to pay and get out of this cursed place as soon as possible. When I pushed the plate away, he immediately approached. In his hand was not a bill, but the same small piece of paper, folded into a neat tube. He handed it to me. His fingers were long, pale, and cold when I took the paper. I reached for the money, but he shook his head, again pointing at the note. Awkwardly unfolding it, I expected to see numbers, the amount due, but instead, in perfect calligraphic handwriting, like a font from an old typewriter, it said, "Your car just started and drove away without you. He is in the trunk now. Do not turn around." My brain refused to process the meaning of the words. I reread the line, then again. "Your car? That's absurd. A multi-ton truck with the ignition off and drove away? He's in the trunk. Who is he?" And that idiotic "do not turn around." And at that very moment, as if on a terrible command, a sound came from the parking lot that froze the blood in my veins. A roar. The deep, powerful, unmistakable roar of my Volvo's diesel engine. It was followed by the grind of a gear engaging, and then the growing rumble, the sound of a truck driving off into the night. The sound died away in the distance until it dissolved into silence completely. I sat there, my fingers clutching the paper, unable to move. Cold horror, sticky and dense, bound me, nailing me to the chair. My truck, my home on wheels, my job, everything I have, was gone by itself. And something was in the trunk, in my trunk. I slowly raised my eyes to the waiter. He stood in the same place with the same absent expression on his face. He didn't look surprised. He looked as if everything happening was a long scripted play, and he was just waiting for me to deliver my next line. What was that? I exhaled, forgetting he couldn't answer. "What kind of freak are you? What's happening?" He didn't react to the insult. Instead, he slowly raised his hand and pointed his index finger towards the window, into the night, then turned his finger and brought it to his sewn-shut lips in the universal gesture for quiet. "Do not turn around." The warning in the note flashed in my mind with new force. But turn around to what? I was already looking ahead. Fear was replaced by a wild animal panic. Adrenaline shot through my head. I jumped up, knocking over the chair with a crash. "They sewed your tongue, but your hands are still there." "Right, explain what the hell is going on here," I shouted, throwing that very piece of paper and the pen at him. He caught both with frightening dexterity. His eyes flashed for a moment with something ancient and inhuman. Then he unfolded the paper, placed it on the counter, and with the same methodical calmness began to write something on the back. Time stretched. Only my watch ticked and my heart beat, ready to burst out of my chest. He finished, turned the paper over, and slid it to my edge of the counter. His hand rested on top of the note, inviting me to read. Unable to control the trembling in my knees, I approached. On the paper was written, "He does not like noise. You woke him, he woke up hungry. He ate, now he will drive on. He liked your truck." I looked at these words, trying to comprehend the nonsense they carried. He woke up, Ate? Who did he eat? My thoughts raced feverishly, clinging to shreds of logic that weren't there. "Who is he?" I whispered, and my voice broke. The waiter took the pen again. His movements were quick and precise. "The one who sleeps on the back of the world. The one whose name is not spoken. The debt collector. He chose you. Your road was loud. You attracted his attention. Mysticism. Pure, insane mysticism. But the sound of the departing truck was real. Those sewn-shut lips were real. This soul-chilling horror was the most real thing I had ever felt. What do I do? My voice was weak, like a child's. The waiter wrote one last phrase and stepped back, his mission seemingly complete. "Wait, or run. He will find you anyway. He already knows your taste." The last words drove an icy spike into me. Knows your taste? This wasn't just a monster that ate someone in my trunk. This was a connoisseur who had appreciated my life, my soul, my fate. I recoiled from the counter. Run, I have to run, anywhere, away from here. I bolted for the door, burst out onto the parking lot. The night swallowed me. It was so dark I couldn't see my own hands. No moonlight, no stars, just black, velvety, all-consuming gloom. And silence. That same absolute silence, but now it was filled with threat. There was something in it. I ran along the highway, not making out the road, stumbling over stones, choking on fear. I ran until a lump rose in my throat and a stitch stabbed my side. I looked back. The lights of the last stop cafe had already disappeared around the bend. I was alone in pitch darkness. And then I heard him. At first it was just a rustle somewhere behind, like a huge body rubbing against asphalt. Then heavy, wet puffing was added, as if something enormous and sick was breathing. I froze, listening, and my heart stopped. The sound was very close. Right behind me, remembering the warning in the note. Do not turn around. I curled into a ball, closed my eyes, praying for this to be a nightmare. The breathing grew louder. I felt it, warm, foul, smelling of rotten meat and gasoline. It washed over my neck. Something large and hard, like an insect's probe, touched the back of my head, as if tasting it. I couldn't take it. The instinct of self-preservation, stronger than any prohibition, made me turn around. The darkness behind me stirred. It wasn't just an absence of light, it was dense, alive, condensed matter. And in it for a moment something flashed. A huge, pale, toothless, funnel-like mouth. Dozens of blind, milky eyes reflecting my face distorted by horror, and clawed paws digging into the asphalt. It looked like a giant, bloated gadfly made of shadows and nightmares. It made a sound, not a roar, not a bellow. It was the screech of metal breaking under a press, mixed with a quiet, childish cry. I screamed, and the darkness covered me head to toe. I came to from a vibration, a dull, rhythmic rumbling. I was lying on something hard and cold in complete darkness. My head was splitting, my whole body ached. I touched my face. It was wet with tears and something sticky. Where was I? What happened to me? I tried to sit up and hit my head on a low ceiling. A familiar smell hit my nostrils. Engine oil, an old blanket, and myself. This was my van, the trunk of my Volvo. Memory returned to me in a burning wave. The cafe, the mute waiter, the note, the monster in the night. Growling with despair, I fumbled in the dark for the internal trunk handle. It wouldn't budge. The locks were engaged. I started hitting the lid, screaming, but the hum of the engine drowned out everything. The car was moving. By itself, driven by whatever was at the wheel now. I fell silent, collapsing onto the floor in exhaustion. My fingers stumbled upon something in the corner. Something small, rectangular, papery. I grabbed it, though it was impossible to see in the dark. I ran my fingertips over it, trying to understand. It was a business card. And then, above my head, from the cabin a sound came. A creak. Slow, drawn out as if something huge and awkward was turning in the driver's seat. That same wet puffing was heard. It was listening. I froze, holding my breath, clutching the ill-fated card in my sweaty palm. The creaking stopped. Another sound was heard, a light, barely perceptible rustle of paper, as if someone's long, bony fingers were unfolding a sheet. And then, through the roar of the engine, a new sound reached me. Quiet, measured, hypnotic, like a tapping. The tap of a ballpoint pen on a wooden tabletop. Tap, tap, tap. It was waiting. Waiting for my next stop, and I understood that now I was the one in the trunk, and that the next driver who entered the last stop cafe would receive a note from the mute waiter. And perhaps one of them would be meant for me. I sat in pitch darkness, listening to the steady hum of the engine and that terrifying, methodical tapping. Tap, 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 coming from the cabin. The sound was clear, merciless, as if counting down the seconds to my end. It was acting as if it weren't a monster from nightmares, but just a driver, perhaps lost in thought, tapping a pen on the steering wheel. But I knew. I had seen that thing. I had felt its breath. My fingers convulsively clenched that very scrap of paper, the business card found in the dark. I ran my thumbs over it, trying to read by touch what was embossed on it. The paper was thick, expensive. Under my nail I caught an indentation, a logo, a circle, and in it, a stylized wing. No, more like a bird. Then a line below, letters. I concentrated, desperately trying to distract myself from the tapping and the fact that I was locked in the trunk of my own truck, which was taking me into the unknown. I sounded out what I felt, letter by letter in a whisper. Avia. The word avia. An airline. What the hell? The tapping in the cabin suddenly stopped. I froze, my heart pounding, ready to burst. I listened. Now only the roar of the engine and the whistle of wind outside the walls were audible. Why did it stop? Did it hear something? Did it sense my fear? Or had we arrived? The car began to slow down. There were no turns. We were driving straight, and now the engine shifted to low revs. The brakes sighed softly. Don't stop. For God's sake, don't stop, I prayed to myself. But the Volvo obediently continued to slow down and soon came to a smooth halt. The engine stalled, silence fell, absolute deafening, the same kind that was in the cafe before it all began. I sat, not breathing, tense, expecting anything. The creak of an opening door, the sound of footsteps, a blow to the trunk lid. But nothing happened. A minute, 2, 5. The silence pressed on my eardrums, becoming unbearable. What was it doing? Why was it just sitting? Maybe it left, abandoned the car, and disappeared. A weak, insane hope began to glow in my heart. Slowly, trying not to make a sound, I rose on my elbows and felt for the internal trunk handle again. I'd already tried it, useless. But now, in the silence, I heard a light, metallic click, as if the lock wasn't fully latched. My heart skipped a beat. Really? Did it make a mistake? Or was it a trap? There was no time to decide. This could be my only chance. Gathering all my will, I pressed the mechanism. A loud, deafening click sounded in the silence. I pushed the trunk lid open with all my might. It gave way with a creak, and cold night air, smelling of dust and wormwood, poured into the crack. I greedily inhaled it and stuck my head out, looking around. We were parked on the shoulder of the same deserted road. No lights, no signs of life. Just an endless dark ribbon of asphalt going nowhere. Flat, dark step to the right and left. The cabin was dark. I couldn't see what was inside. I didn't want to see it. Mindlessly, obeying the instinct to flee, I tumbled out of the trunk onto the asphalt, painfully hitting my knee. Got up, staggered away from the car, ready to run for my life wherever my eyes looked, and then my hand, still clutching the business card, bumped into something in my jacket pocket. Something hard, rectangular. Another object. I mechanically shoved my hand into my pocket and pulled it out. It was my own notepad, the one I usually use to write down routes and expenses. And with it, my own pen. I froze, not understanding. Where from? I didn't put it there. The last thing I remembered, the notepad was in the cabin on the passenger seat. So, it was in the cabin. It took my notepad and put it in my pocket. Why? With trembling hands I opened it. On the very first page, under my old notes, in perfect calligraphic handwriting, the same one from the waiter's note, was written, "Next stop, 35 miles. Cafe Wings. Don't be late. You are the courier now." And below, as if in confirmation, the same logo I had felt on the business card was drawn, a stylized bird in a circle. I raised my eyes to my truck. It stood as a grim red silhouette in the night, lifeless, quiet. There was no one in it. Or was there? The driver's door was slightly ajar. I was shaking. I was a courier for this. This thing, it didn't kill me. It gave me a task. And an intuition, chilling my already cold blood, suggested that refusing meant signing my own death sentence here and now. I looked at the road. 35 miles. On foot, through the night backcountry without water or a weapon. That was a sure way to die. I had no choice. As if in a dream, I approached the cabin. The interior smelled foreign. That same sweetish putrid smell as in the cafe. On the driver's seat lay another note, pressed against the windshield from the inside by the wiper blade. Drive the car. Do not look back at the cargo. The cargo, the one that was in the trunk, the one it ate, or what it brought. I got behind the wheel, inserted the key into the ignition with stiff fingers. The steering wheel was sticky. I tried not to think about what with. The engine started on the first try. I turned on the headlights and two bright beams cut into the darkness, illuminating the empty road. I didn't look in the rear-view mirror. I was afraid of seeing something there looking back at me. I drove off. The next half hour was the most terrifying stretch of road in my life. Every sound, every creak of the body made me flinch. I expected to hear a screech, a knock from the trunk, for the note to be a lie, and for it to already be here behind my back. But it was quiet. Too quiet. Ahead, in the distance, a dim point of light appeared. It grew, turning into familiar outlines. A low building, a neon sign, fading letters. Wings. The same architecture as the last stop. The same empty parking lot. I braked, killed the engine. My hands were sticky with sweat. What to do next? Go in? But there. Would there be another waiter like that? Or was it I got out of the car? My legs were giving way. The air was still and cold. I walked to the cafe door. Through the fogged glass I saw movement. There was someone there. Not the waiter. An older man in a trucker's cap. He was talking animatedly to the bartender. So there were people here. Living people. Relief, sweet and intoxicating, washed over me. I pulled the door handle. The bell jangled just as unpleasantly as in that other place. The two men at the counter turned around. The bartender, the same one. Tall, thin, with a sewn-shut mouth. His dead eyes met mine, and he nodded almost imperceptibly as if expecting me. The second man, the trucker, grinned widely. Finally, he said in a booming voice. I was starting to think my order got lost. Tony, right? I was speechless. How did he know my name? The mute bartender slid out from behind the counter and went outside, heading towards my truck, towards the trunk. Hey, you look like a ghost. The guy continued, spitting sunflower seed shells on the floor. All pale. Road was tough, huh? I get it, brother, I get it. I just came from the past myself. Damn black ice. He chattered, and I couldn't utter a word. I watched as the mute waiter approached my car, unlatched the trunk, and leaned over it. He was doing something there. Unloading something. Or loading. So you got my package? The trucker asked cheerfully, coming up to me and slapping me on the shoulder. His hand was heavy and rough. They told me it was with you. I was silent. I didn't understand what he was talking about. What package? And then my gaze fell on the bar counter. Next to a dirty ashtray lay my notepad. Open. On a clean page in the same calligraphic handwriting, it was written, "Give him the keys to the truck. That is his payment. The keys to my Volvo. My home. My life. Hey buddy, you okay?" The trucker's voice became wary. "You look like you've seen the devil." I had seen something worse. I had seen the system. A ruthless, well-oiled machine, whose cogs were all of us. Drivers, waiters, cafes on the outskirts. And now I had become a part of it. The mute waiter returned to the cafe. He looked at me, then at the trucker, and nodded towards the door. The deed was done. The cargo delivered. Or received. I didn't know. I didn't want to know. The trucker, not waiting for an answer, shrugged and went outside. A moment later, the roar of a started engine came from the parking lot. My engine. I saw the lights of my Volvo flash, turn around and disappear into the night. He drove off in my truck, and he didn't even know what he was carrying with him. I was left standing in the middle of the cafe, devastated, with the keys to a truck that no longer existed in my hand. The mute waiter returned behind the counter and began silently wiping a glass. He became just part of the interior again. On the table, where he had glanced, lay a new business card and a new note. Your truck is waiting around back. The next point on the map is marked, do not be late. He does not like to wait. I slowly walked over and took the note. And then the card. This time the logo was different, not a bird, but something like a drop or a tear, and the address was different. I went out the back door of the cafe. On a small dirt lot stood a truck, an old weathered man truck in a dirty white color. It looked completely normal. The key was in the ignition. I walked around it and mechanically, almost without thinking, unlatched the trunk. It was empty, clean. It smelled of ozone and sterile cleanliness, like in an operating room. I slammed it shut and climbed into the cab. The interior smelled of foreign tobacco and old booze. On the passenger seat lay an open map. A route was marked on it. And the next point, the tear of Cassiopeia diner by the old port. I started the engine. It roared, obedient and powerful. I put my hand on the gearshift lever, and then my fingers felt something rough on the handle. I looked down. On the black plastic, someone had scratched a single, crude but recognizable symbol with a sharp object. A stylized wing, the sign of wings, a warning or a reminder that I was part of this now, forever. I engaged the gear and pulled away, carrying with me the silence and a new foreign cargo I was afraid to even think about. The road was ahead, and the endless night. The fifth story. Salt and ash. Instead of salt, the shaker on the table contained fine gray ash that smelled of burnt meat. Travis snorted, pushing the disgusting thing away. "Chicago, what have you become?" he muttered, wiping his fingers on his jeans. He had ducked into this smoky cafe in the very center of the city to wait out a sudden downpour. The glass walls had turned into an aquarium with streams of water, a gray, blurred world swirling beyond them. Inside, it smelled of old oil, damp clothing, and something else, faint yet unmistakable, sweetish and unpleasant. He ordered coffee and French fries, the only patron in this godforsaken place, it seemed. At least that's what he thought until he looked around. About 10 people sat at tables along the walls. They weren't talking, looking at their phones or eating. They just sat, motionless. Like mannequins placed by a negligent owner, the food came quickly. The waitress, a thin woman with sunken cheeks and dark circles under her eyes, silently placed a plate of fries and a cup of asphalt-colored coffee in front of him. She didn't even look at him. Her gaze was fixed somewhere around his chin before quickly darting away. Travis reached for the salt shaker, a massive glass one with a metal lid. He shook it. Instead of the expected white grains, fine gray ash sprinkled onto his fries. He actually jumped from the surprise. What the... He brought a pinch to his nose and smelled that very nauseatingly sweet smell of smoke that lingers after a big fire. The smell of burnt meat, plastic, and something organic that can't be described, but is impossible to forget. His stomach clenched. He pushed the shaker away, and it clattered noisily across the table. And then his gaze fell on the plates of the other patrons. What he had taken for steaks, cutlets, or burgers was not food. They were lumps of charcoal, charred, cracked, in places still smoldering with black ash. One woman held a fork skewering a burnt piece of meat from which a thin stream of smoke rose. She wasn't trying to eat it. She was just holding it. Her fingers were black with soot. Every dish in the cafe was not cooked, but burned to a crisp. An icy shiver crawled down Travis's spine. He slowly scanned the room. No one moved. All 10 people sat staring at a single point on the blank wall, as if the most captivating film in the world were playing there. Their faces were empty, devoid of any emotion. Wax masks. Travis's heart began to beat faster. The rain outside suddenly stopped, and in the ensuing silence a faint crackling could be heard. The food on the plate of the guy in the cap was smoldering. "Hey!" Travis shouted, and his voice sounded deafeningly loud in the tomb-like silence. "What's going on here? What kind of circus is this?" Not a single reaction. Not a sigh, not a glance, not a blink. 10 pairs of empty eyes continued to stare at the wall. Only the waitress at the counter stirred. She turned her head toward him, and her eyes, huge and dark, full of bottomless anguish, finally met his gaze. She took a step toward his table, then another. Her movements were fluid, almost gliding. They always stop here on their way, she whispered, and her voice was like the rustle of ashes. He could barely make out the words. Travis jumped up. Adrenaline shot through his head. Who? What nonsense are you talking? Get the manager. The waitress shook her head, and something like a smile flickered on her lips. So sad it was physically painful. This is a cafe for those who didn't make it, she continued, just as quietly, but each word seared into his consciousness like a red-hot nail. They wait for theirs, or they just wait. They're in no hurry to go anywhere anymore. She looked directly at him, and her gaze held an inhuman pity. You won't make it either. That phrase was enough. Travis bolted for the exit, knocking over a chair on the way. His palms hit the glass door. It didn't budge. Neither the handle nor the push bar worked. The door was locked. He began pounding on the glass with his fists, screaming, but there was no one outside. The street was deserted. After the downpour, not a pedestrian, not a car. Just puddles reflecting the gloomy sky. Open the door. Open the fucking door, he yelled, beating against the impenetrable glass. A creak sounded behind his back. He froze and slowly turned around. All 10 people had turned their heads and were looking at him. Their empty eyes were now fixed on him. They didn't move from their spots. They just stared. 10 pairs of eyes full of silent, indifferent horror. And then he saw the details he hadn't noticed before. The man in the corner had half his face charred. The skin slipped away, revealing blackened bone. The woman with the fork had a clear blue seatbelt mark on her neck. The guy in the cap had a shard of glass, long and sharp as a dagger, protruding from under his jacket. These were not living people. These were ghosts, echoes, those who didn't make it. Travis leaned his back against the cold glass, trying to get his numb brain to work. Breathe, have to breathe. The waitress still stood in the middle of the room, watching him. They won't harm you, she said. They just wait. Sometimes someone comes for them, sometimes not. And sometimes they find traveling companions. The cook emerged from behind the counter, a tall, burly man in a stained apron. His face was red and sweaty, but his eyes were exactly like the waitress's, old, tired, having seen 1,000 deaths. In his hand, he held a large cast-iron skillet. It was glowing red-hot, heat radiating from it, making the air shimmer, along with that same sweetish smell of something scorched. "Sit down, kid," the cook rasped. His voice sounded as if his throat had been scrubbed with sandpaper. "Time for a bite. It's a long road ahead." Travis reached for his phone. "I'm calling the police right now." The cook chuckled, short and dry. "They won't find it. This place is on the map only for those who are looking for it, or for those it is looking for." The waitress nodded toward the window. "Look." Travis turned his head. Outside the glass in the cafe's reflection, he saw himself pressed against the door, pale, frightened. He saw the motionless figures at the tables. He saw the cook with the skillet, and then the reflection smoked. The edges blurred, and another image showed through it. A dark road, wet asphalt gleaming under the moon. His own car, crumpled like an accordion, crashed into a barrier. And next to it, on the shoulder, lay his own body, twisted unnaturally, a pool of blood slowly spreading across the wet asphalt, mixing with the rainwater. It was the future. His future. In a few minutes. "No," he exhaled. "That can't be." "It can," the cook said simply, taking a step forward. The heat from the skillet was already scorching Travis's face. "It's already happened. You're just not there yet. We are the destination. The last stop." Travis darted along the wall, trying to find another exit, to the restroom, the kitchen, a back door. He flung a chair. It flew toward the cook, but he didn't even flinch, just batted it away with the skillet like a fly. The back door was blocked by a huge refrigerator. The path was cut off, and then his phone rang. A sharp, piercing ringtone cut through the dead silence. The screen lit up with a name, Laura, his wife. Hope, wild, blind, slammed into his temples. He put the phone to his ear. "Laura! Honey, listen, Travis?" Her voice was frightened, broken by tears. "Travis, honey, where are you?" They just said on the radio. "There's been an accident on the city exit in the tunnel. A car like yours. Travis, it's not you, is it? Answer me, please. Tell me it's not you." He couldn't utter a word. He looked at his reflection in the glass, at his dead body on the asphalt. He saw ambulances pulling up to the accident site, their blue lights flashing. His voice broke. "I love you, Laura. Tell the kids." He heard her sobbing on the line and then silence. The connection was lost. The phone fell from his hand and shattered on the tiled floor. The call had been the last bridge to his old life, and that bridge had collapsed. He slowly turned around. The cook stood 2 steps away, his skillet still blazing with heat. The waitress looked at him with infinite sadness. The ghosts at the tables waited. Travis understood. He was already dead. He just hadn't caught up with his body yet. This cafe was Limbo, the antechamber, a place where the souls of those who died suddenly, in accidents, disasters, fires, make their last stop. They wait until their physical shell ceases to exist, and only then can they move on. And the ash in the shaker, that's what's left of them, a memory of their death. He no longer felt fear, only a chilling, all-consuming emptiness. He slowly walked to his table and sank into the chair. The plate of fries was still in front of him. The cook approached him, his shadow enveloping Travis. "Doesn't hurt," the cook whispered hoarsely. "You won't feel a thing. You're almost there." He overturned the red-hot skillet over Travis's plate, a blinding flash of white fire. Unbearable heat. Travis squeezed his eyes shut, expecting pain, but there was none. There was only thick, suffocating smoke, the smell of soot and burnt meat, which was now his smell forever. When he opened his eyes, the smoke cleared. His French fries lay on the plate as a black, charred lump, slightly smoldering. He looked at his hands. They were intact, but he felt different, empty, quiet. All emotions, all fear, all pain had gone, leaving behind only a quiet, indifferent calm. The waitress silently placed a new salt shaker in front of him. He mechanically shook it. Fine gray ash, smelling of burnt meat, spilled out. Travis raised his eyes and saw that all the others were staring at the wall again. Their attention to him had waned. He had become one of them. He had become one of them. He put his hands on the table and also stared at the blank beige-painted wall. He saw nothing in it, but he could wait. Now he had an eternity. Behind his back, the bell above the door chimed again. Into the cafe, escaping a suddenly pouring rain, walked a new patron. A young guy in a biker jacket wiping his wet face. "Damn weather," he muttered, plopping down at a free table. "Coffee, please, and a cheeseburger." The waitress nodded silently and shuffled behind the counter. The guy reached for the salt shaker, shook it out of curiosity, and grimaced when gray ash sprinkled onto the table. "Hey, what is this?" He brought a pinch to his nose and smelled the nauseatingly sweet smell of smoke. "You guys run out of salt or something?" He looked around, noticed the motionless figures at the tables, their charred food. His smile slowly slid off his face. "Hey guys, what's going on here?" Travis sat motionless, staring at the wall. He heard nothing. He only waited. He knew this guy wouldn't make it either, and his burger would be well done, to a crisp. The 6th story. Discount for a traveling companion. The owner of the cafe offered me a 50% discount if I gave his brother a ride to the next town, and he pointed at a stuffed figure in the corner. The words hung in the stifling air, saturated with the smell of old grease. I didn't understand at first, wondering if I'd misheard him, or if this was some strange local humor from these backwoods places. I was lost. The navigator, which I had been cursing for the last 3 hours, had finally died, stuck on the message, "No network signal," and the endless back roads, winding between nameless hills and sickly forests, had led me here. to this godforsaken dive with a faded sign, "We'll feed and warm you." The building looked more like a shed, once clad in white tin, now blackened and rusty. Inside, it smelled of onions, fried meat, and something musty and sweet that made your eyes water. Behind the counter stood him, the owner, tall, bony, with a face that seemed to have been hacked out of old oak with an axe. Deep-set eyes looked at me without much interest. He was wearing an apron stained with brown spots, the nature of which I didn't even want to begin to guess at. He was wiping something with a dirty rag, his movements precise, economical, devoid of fuss. "Some soup left," he grunted, not asking if I wanted anything. His accent was coarse, vaguely Eastern, but not in the sense of the Russian Far East. It was as if he came from places where they speak forgotten languages. I just nodded, too tired to argue or choose. He poured a murky liquid from a large pot into a tin bowl and set it in front of me. It cost a couple of dollars. The soup was hot and surprisingly edible. As I ate, feeling the warmth spread through my frozen body, the owner watched me intently. His silence was oppressive. When I finished the last spoonful, he approached. "Long way to go?" he asked. "To Carson City," I replied, hoping the name meant something to him. He nodded slowly, his gaze sliding over my face, my jacket, to the car keys lying on the table. "Listen." His voice grew quieter, almost conspiratorial. "The road is long at night, pouring alone. Help my brother. Get yourself a discount." I stared at him, not understanding. "What kind of discount? On the soup? I already paid." "Not on the soup." He jerked his head towards a dark corner of the room where the shadows were particularly thick. "On life, 50%. And then I saw it. In the corner on a chair sat a figure, motionless, frozen. It was wearing worn-out jeans, a plaid shirt, and a cowboy hat pulled down over its face. From under the hat, strands of hair were visible, unnaturally gray like ash. At first I thought it was a drunk patron or another worker who had dozed off in the corner. But something was wrong. Too still, too perfect. Two perfectly folded hands resting on its knees. The skin on them had a waxy sheen. "My brother Al," said the owner, walking up to the figure. "A quiet one. Give him a lift to the next town. He needs to get there." He slapped his brother on the shoulder. It wasn't the sound of a hand hitting a living body. It was a dull, rustling thump, like hitting a sack stuffed with dry leaves and dust. And from under the owner's palm, from the sleeve of the brother's shirt, dust actually poured out. A thin stream of gray ash settled on the floor. An icy needle of fear drove straight into the base of my skull and instantly flooded my entire body. It was a stuffed figure, meticulously with ghastly skill crafted to look like a man, dressed in real clothes. I could now make out the crude stitches at the joints, tiny patches of burlap peeking out from under the collar, button eyes sewn on in place of real ones. My brain refused to process the image. The offer, the discount, the brother, the effigy. "No," I exhaled, jumping back from the counter so hard that the chair crashed to the floor. "No thank you, I'm in a hurry." The owner didn't even change his expression. His sullen look didn't flicker. He just tilted his head slightly, as if studying a rare but not particularly interesting insect. "Pity," he said without a trace of regret. "His ride can't be cancelled." I didn't say anything else. I turned and ran for the exit, my heart pounding somewhere in my throat, drowning out all other sounds. I burst into my car, slammed the door shut, and with trembling hands inserted the key into the ignition. The engine started on the first try, a small miracle in this nightmare. I slammed on the gas, pulled out onto the dirt road, and sped away into the darkness, in the direction I hoped led to a main road. After driving about a kilometer, I risked a glance in the rearview mirror, and I saw behind me, about 300 meters back, an old rusty pickup truck was moving. It was driving without its headlights on. Behind the wheel sat the cafe owner. His face, illuminated by the dim light of the dashboard, was calm and focused. and on the passenger seat next to him, right by the window, sat the effigy. Al, his cowboy hat was pulled down right over his eyes, and his head was staring unnaturally straight ahead at my car. They were following me. Slowly, unhurriedly, but relentlessly. I floored the gas pedal. My sedan jumped over the potholes, its suspension squealing in protest. I was speeding blindly just to increase the distance between us. After a few minutes, I looked in the mirror again. Darkness. No one. I slowed down, trying to catch my breath. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe he was just heading out on his own business. Logic screamed that it was absurd to be afraid of a stuffed figure and a sullen diner owner. I turned onto the first more or less paved section, hoping it would lead me to the highway. And I allowed myself to look in the mirror again. They were there, still at the same distance. The rusty pickup sailed through the darkness without lights, like a ghost ship. The owner at the wheel, and the motionless figure of his brother in the passenger seat. Panic, cold and nauseating, washed over me again. I accelerated again. The road twisted, heading into a forested area. I hoped to lose them on the curves. I turned off my headlights and sharply turned onto a narrow, almost invisible forest road leading deep into the thicket. I drove the car into some bushes and killed the engine. Silence. Only the crackle of cooling metal and my own ragged breathing. I sat, pressed into my seat, and watched the gap between the trees in the side mirror, the place where the road should appear. 1 minute, 2, 5, no one. Only the wind rustling the tops of the pines. I began to slowly come to my senses. Stupidity. I let fear and fatigue get the better of me. It was probably just a coincidence. Maybe he had something in the truck bed and I mistook it for... No, I definitely saw that effigy, but they were gone now. I was about to start the car when I heard a sound. A dull, slow crunching, as if a very heavy car with ruined suspension was driving over gravel. I froze. From around the bend at low speed without lights emerged that same rusty pickup. It drove past my hiding place without slowing down. I saw the owner's profile, the same stony, impassive gaze fixed straight ahead, and next to him, Al. The effigy sat with its head thrown back against the headrest, and I thought its cloth mouth was stretched into a thin, crooked smile. They couldn't have seen me. I was well hidden, but they were driving on this very road, as if they knew exactly where I had turned. The pickup slowly disappeared behind the trees. I didn't move for another 10 minutes, afraid they would return. But there was only silence. I decided to drive in the opposite direction, back towards the cafe, and try to find another way. It was risky, but I couldn't drive forward, following that nightmare. I started up and drove back, turning my headlights on full beam. The forest seemed even more hostile. Every shadow looked like that pickup, but there was no one around. I found myself back at that same turnoff onto the road to the cafe. And then I saw it. The pickup was parked across the road, blocking the way. The owner wasn't at the wheel. The vehicle was empty. My heart sank. I stopped abruptly, about to reverse, but at that moment a tall figure emerged from the darkness in front of the hood. The owner. He was standing holding something large wrapped in burlap. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking somewhere towards the passenger door of my car. Then he took a few steps, approached my door. I instinctively hit the door lock. He didn't try to open it. He simply placed the bundle on the ground next to the door, nodded at me like a business partner who had closed a lucrative deal, and silently walked to his pickup. He started it, turned around, and drove off in the direction I had originally come from. I sat, unable to move, staring at that bundle. It was the size of a person. The burlap was torn in places, and the same unnaturally grey strand of hair stuck out from it. He had left it. Left it for me. I don't remember getting out of the car. How trembling with horror and disgust I nudged the bundle with my foot. It was surprisingly light. I couldn't leave it here. I couldn't just drive away. What if it was a real body? What if under the burlap? With a wild effort of will, I unwrapped the bundle. It was the effigy. The same one. Al. His glass eyes looked at the sky with lifeless curiosity. The cloth mouth was still twisted into a semblance of a smile. It smelled of dust, old clothes, and that same sweetish, putrid smell from the cafe. I recoiled, got in the car, and tore off, swerving around the bundle on the shoulder. I raced on, not caring about the road, until I saw lights on the horizon and the familiar sign of a gas station on the highway. Civilization. I didn't go to the police. What would I tell them? That I was offered a ride to a stuffed figure, and then its owner chased me and threw it on the road? They would have thought I was crazy or drunk. I got home. For weeks I tried to forget it. I convinced myself I was the victim of someone's sick prank. Maybe it was a local tradition to play tricks on strangers like that. Maybe that guy was just not right in the head. But this morning, I left the house and froze. Leaned against my passenger door stood him. Al, in the same cowboy hat, the same shirt. Pinned to his chest was a note, written in the same clumsy handwriting as the menu in that cafe. Discount still valid. Thanks for giving my brother a ride. He says you liked it. Waiting for the return trip. And clutched in the dry cloth hand of the effigy was a key. The key to my apartment. And right now I'm sitting in the locked bathroom and I can hear the floor creaking in the hallway. Slow shuffling steps. Steps from which dust falls. He's walking around my apartment. And quietly, barely audibly, he's whistling the same old forgotten tune. He's waiting for me to come out. To discuss the terms of the return trip. Or to remind me that the discount is still valid. On everything.